The sun always rose gently over the wide stretch of farmland, painting the sky with warm shades of orange and pink. For most people in the countryside, mornings were calm, quiet, and predictable. But for her, mornings were not just about the beginning of a new day. They were about discipline, routine, and a promise she made long ago to herself to live a peaceful life. The black woman, known only by her first name to her neighbors, carried herself with quiet strength. She lived alone on her farm, surrounded by tall wooden fences, fruit trees, and animals that depended on her for food and care. To most people, she seemed like any other farmer, a hard-working woman who rose before dawn, worked tirelessly until the sun dipped below the horizon and went to bed without much fuss. But behind her calm eyes and steady movements lived a history that almost no one around her could imagine. Every morning, she followed the same routine. She would step outside with her boots laced tightly, the cool morning air brushing against her face, and begin feeding the chickens, goats, and cows. She carried heavy buckets with ease, never showing strain. Years of training had taught her how to conserve energy, how to move in rhythm with the tasks at hand. For her, the farm was not only a home, it was a mission. It gave her purpose after years of service in another, far different field. Her hands were strong and rough from both past and present. While others her age might have slowed down, she seemed tireless, steady, almost unshakable. She rarely spoke about her past. If someone asked, she would smile politely, give a short answer, and return to her work. Most neighbors assumed she had lived in the city before buying the land. Some whispered that she had been in the service, but no one pressed for details. In truth, she had once been one of the most skilled Marine snipers of her generation. She had served her country with honor, carrying out missions in distant lands where every second required focus and every decision meant survival. But she had left that life behind. She never spoke of the details because she didn't want those memories shadowing the peaceful life she built for herself now. The farm was her sanctuary, her way of reconnecting with the earth and finding quiet after years of noise. Her days were long but fulfilling. She enjoyed the small things, the smell of fresh hay, the sight of new sprouts pushing up through the soil, the sound of animals calling at feeding time. She worked with patience, never rushing, never cutting corners. Just like in her former life, she believed every detail mattered. She knew exactly how many eggs her hens usually laid, which cow was most restless, and when the soil needed water. Her eyes, trained to notice the smallest shifts, could spot when something was out of place long before anyone else would have noticed. Though she kept mostly to herself, the community respected her. At the farmer's market, people saw her as quiet but reliable. Her produce was fresh, her vegetables healthy, her honey jars lined up neatly and sold out quickly. Sometimes, children from nearby families would wave to her as she passed by in her old pickup truck. She would smile back, a rare softness showing through the lines of her face. Life on the farm demanded early mornings and late nights, but she didn't mind. For her, it was a trade she gladly made. She had seen too much of a different world. The noise of helicopters, the tension of battlefields, the long silences before a mission began. Those images stayed in her memory, though she never spoke of them. Now she found comfort in the rhythm of the farm. The silence of the fields was different. It was healing. Yet sometimes at night, when the farm was quiet and the stars stretched, across the sky she would sit on her porch with a cup of tea and her old thoughts would return. She remembered comrades, faces she had not seen in years. She remembered the weight of her rifle, the endless patience required to wait for hours without moving, the steady breath before pulling the trigger. These memories did not frighten her, but they reminded her of who she truly was beneath the surface. Despite her attempts to live quietly, there were small signs of her old life still present. The way she moved, swiftly, efficiently, was not like ordinary farmers. She always kept her tools organized, her surroundings neat. Even the way she locked her doors and checked her windows showed a certain cautiousness. And deep in a trunk, inside her house, hidden under blankets and old clothes, rested her marine gear. She had not touched it in years, but she could never bring herself to throw it away. It was part of her identity, a reminder of the path that had brought her here. Neighbors often wondered why she never seemed afraid of being alone. Many farms in the area had been victims of petty theft, stolen chickens, missing tools, or broken fences, but she never complained, never asked for help. She handled everything herself, with quiet determination. She had built her fences higher and reinforced her barn doors with her own hands. While others might have seen this as unnecessary, she knew better. Experience had taught her that it was always better to be prepared. Her appearance also added to her quiet mystique. She was tall, with a strong posture that suggested confidence. Her eyes, calm but sharp, seemed to notice everything around her. She rarely raised her voice, yet when she spoke, people listened. There was something about her presence, firm but not intimidating, calm but commanding respect. The land itself became a reflection of her character. It was orderly, well cared for, productive, and strong. Visitors often remarked how peaceful her farm felt, as though nothing bad could happen there. But she knew better. She had lived long enough to understand that danger often came when it was least expected. And so, while she worked hard to maintain peace, she always carried an invisible shield of awareness, a silent readiness that no one could see but her. Every evening, she ended her day by checking on the animals one last time, making sure the farm was secure. She would walk slowly around the property, scanning the fields and tree lines, her instincts guiding her eyes to every shadow and movement. To others, it might have seemed unnecessary, but to her, it was second nature. She often thought about how different her life had become. Once she had lived in a world where her skills were known, respected, and depended on. Now, she lived where no one knew the truth, and she liked it that way. It allowed her to start fresh, to live not as a soldier but as a farmer, a caretaker, a woman who had earned her rest. But deep inside, she knew that if the day ever came when her peace was threatened, the skills she had tried to put away would rise again. She did not wish for that day, but she knew herself well enough to understand she would be ready. And so, as the sun set and the fields turned golden in the fading light, she sat quietly on her porch, watching over her land. To the world, she was just a farmer, a simple woman tending to her animals and crops. But inside, she was much more. A legendary Marine sniper who had traded her battlefield for a farm field, her rifle for a shovel, and her uniform for work, clothes. She hoped the world would never force her to reveal that side again. All she wanted was peace. But sometimes life had a way of testing even those who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. The countryside had always been known for its silence. The air carried the scent of earth, the rustle of trees, and the distant sound of animals. For a long time, this silence had been safe, but lately, whispers of unease began to spread among the farmers. Strange men had been seen on the roads, moving in groups, their presence unfamiliar and unwelcome. Families spoke of stolen livestock, missing equipment, and barns broken into during the night. Some thought it was just mischief, but others feared something more organized. The woman listened quietly when neighbors spoke at the farmers' market. She never joined the gossip, but she noticed the tension in their voices. One farmer complained of losing 2 goats in 1 week. Another said his tools had vanished, and his fences had been cut deliberately. There was unease in the community, but most people didn't know what to do. The local sheriff's office was small, already stretched thin across miles of farmland. It was clear that the people were vulnerable. She drove home with her truck loaded with vegetables, her face calm as always, but her mind sharp and alert. She did not dismiss these stories. She had lived long enough to know that when small crimes were left unchecked, they grew into larger ones. What most people did not see, she noticed immediately: the signs of a gang testing the area. This was no ordinary theft. It was organized. They were pushing boundaries, seeing how much they could take before someone stopped them. Her farm, with its tall fences, strong animals, and fertile soil, would not go unnoticed for long. She knew this in her bones, yet she did not let fear rule her. Instead, she prepared in her quiet way. At night, she began checking her locks more carefully. She reinforced her barn doors with heavy beams. She walked the land with a lantern, letting her eyes adjust to the shadows, noticing where someone might try to enter. She was calm but thorough, as she always had been. A week later, her suspicions proved correct. Strange tire marks appeared, near the edge of her land, far from the main road. She studied them in the morning light, kneeling down to see the patterns. They were fresh, not more than a few hours old. Someone had driven close, maybe to scout the property. She brushed the dirt off her hands, stood up, and looked across the open field. Nothing moved, but she felt the truth deep inside her. Someone was watching. That night, she sat on her porch longer than usual, her tea growing cold beside her. She kept her eyes on the tree line. A person without her experience might have seen only darkness, but she noticed small movements, the flicker of a shadow, the glint of something metallic under the moonlight. They were keeping their distance, but they were there, testing her. She did not panic. Instead, she thought of her old life, the years she had trained to remain unseen, to study targets without being noticed. Whoever these men were, they thought they were hunters. But she recognized their mistakes, their careless movements, the way they shifted too often, the impatience in their stance. She could almost hear the voice of her old Marine instructor reminding her, "Patience wins every time." The following morning, she went about her chores as if nothing had happened. She fed her chickens, milked the cows, and carried hay to the barn. But her eyes swept over the land, cataloging details. A broken twig near the fence, a footprint half buried in the soil. They had come closer, bolder now. Later in the week, the community gathered again at the market. The news had grown worse. One farmer had been confronted directly by a group of men demanding payment for protection. He had tried to resist, but was beaten down and left frightened. Word spread quickly. People whispered that a gang had moved into the countryside, determined to control it. The woman listened quietly as she arranged jars of honey on her table. The other farmers spoke in hushed voices, their fear obvious. She said little, only nodding when they looked to her. Most thought she was just a solitary farmer who would share the same fate as the rest of them if the gang chose her land next. None of them knew the truth, that she was already prepared in ways they could not imagine. That night, she went into her house and unlocked the trunk she had not opened in years. Inside lay her old Marine gear, her uniform folded neatly, her boots still strong, and her sniper rifle cleaned and oiled long ago, as if waiting for this moment. She touched it with steady hands, her fingers tracing the cold metal. She did not feel excitement or fear, only calm acceptance. She had not wanted to return to this part of herself, but the world did not always grant what one wanted. She checked the rifle carefully, her movements precise. Every click, every adjustment brought back memories of nights on faraway hillsides, where she had waited in silence, watching through her scope. She remembered the patience it took, the discipline to remain still while the world moved around her. Those skills were still inside her. They had never left. When she finished, she placed the rifle back into its case and closed the trunk. She did not want to use it unless absolutely necessary, but she needed to be ready. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. The gang had not struck her land yet, but she knew they would. They wanted to show power, to break the spirit of the farmers. Her land, with its strong fences and healthy animals, would be a perfect target to send a message. She began preparing her farm as if it were a battlefield. She moved quietly, making adjustments that looked like ordinary farm work but were much more. She reinforced certain posts, laid out tools where she could reach them quickly, and cleared paths where she might need to move silently in the dark. She even shifted the positions of her animals, placing some closer to the barn where they would be safer if trouble came. At night, she stood on her porch, listening. She could sense the storm building. The gang was circling, growing bolder, feeding off the fear of the community. But she was not afraid. She was patient. She was ready. One evening, as she checked her property under the fading light, she spotted a figure near the far fence. He was tall, his movements unsteady as though he thought no one was watching. She stood still, hidden in the shadows, watching him. He rattled the fence slightly, testing it, then slipped back into the trees. She exhaled slowly, her eyes steady. The raid was coming soon. They had chosen her, and so she went back inside, locking her doors carefully. She turned off the lights, letting her house sink into quiet darkness. She poured herself another cup of tea and sat by the window. The gang believed they were predators, ready to take what they wanted. But what they did not know was that the woman they planned to raid was no ordinary farmer. She was a legendary Marine sniper who had lived her life preparing for moments like this. The night arrived quiet and wide, with a soft wind moving the leaves and a silver moon hanging above the fields. She felt it in the air, the kind of stillness that did not come with peace, but with a pause before something began. She finished her evening routine earlier than usual. The animals were calm, the fences were secure. The barn doors were reinforced from the inside, sliding on tracks she had oiled that morning so they would close without a sound. Her yard looked like a normal farmyard, but she had walked every corner during the day, fixing small things that most eyes would miss. She had trimmed a low branch near the driveway so it would not block the motion light. She had moved a rake and a coil of rope to a spot she could reach quickly. She had placed a thick wooden beam near the porch to brace the door if needed. None of it seemed unusual, but to her it was a plan. She wore plain clothes, dark work pants, a sweater, and boots laced tight. She tied her hair back and kept her phone in her pocket, volume off, flashlight disabled. Her house lights stayed off. She sat for a while by the window, a cup of tea untouched on the table beside her. Her gaze stayed on the tree line beyond the far fence. It was only a line of shadow to most people, but to her, it was a page full of details, angles, gaps, and places where someone might move without being seen. She did not feel afraid. She felt ready. Just after 11, the first sign arrived. The goats in the far pen gave a short, uneasy sound and then went quiet, the way animals do when they sense movement they do not understand. She stood, set the cup aside, and stepped onto the porch. The night air was cool, and the wooden boards beneath her feet knew her weight. She paused, listening. Somewhere past the road, a vehicle engine hummed low, slowing, then cutting off. The wind shifted. She caught a faint smell of dust, then silence again. She breathed in slowly and let it go. She walked the short path along the side of the house, keeping close to the wall. At the corner, she stopped and studied the yard. She had hung metal rings on a string above the rear gate that afternoon. If someone opened the gate, they would make a soft clink, not loud, but just enough to carry on a quiet night. She also had small bells near the barn rafters and a thin line of pebbles in a shallow tin tray by the tool shed door. She didn't want to harm anyone. She wanted to know where they were without being seen. These simple markers would tell her. Her phone buzzed once against her leg, a preset timer she had set as a reminder. She opened her Notes app, scrolled to a list labeled Night Plan, and tapped one button. Notify. It sent a short, pre-written text to the local sheriff's office line and a neighbor's group she trusted. Unusual activity near my fence line. Please stay home, sheriff notified. She knew the sheriff's small team would do what they could. She also knew they were far. The message was not a call for help. It was a line of record and a gentle warning to keep others safe. She moved to the barn side door and eased it open. Inside, the scent of hay and old wood felt like company. She climbed the ladder to the loft where the air was warm and still. From there, she had a higher view of the fields. She lay on her stomach on a folded blanket and lifted a pair of old binoculars. Her hands were steady. The glass was clean. She adjusted the focus until the tree line sharpened. Shapes appeared. First one, then three, then more. They were careful, moving with slow steps and long pauses. She counted them without thinking, the way a person counts as they breathe. She watched how they stood, who led and who followed, how they tested the fence line with their eyes before touching it. She made a small mental note when one of them turned back to the road, probably to signal the others. She could guess their plan: check the back fence, slip through the low corner, head for the barn and then the house. It was the most open path, and they assumed no one was watching. She allowed herself a brief, quiet smile. She had made that path look easy on purpose. When the first figure reached the fence corner, he reached up to press on the wire. The wire held firm. The tall posts she had set last summer were true and deep. He tried the gate a few yards down. The metal rings touched and gave a whisper of sound, just enough to carry. She tilted her head. Another figure froze. They did not speak, but their pause said enough. She let the seconds stretch. She reached to her right and clicked a small remote. Across the yard, a motion sensor light flared to life, bright as day, and pointed not at them but along the ground ahead of them, washing the grass with a flood of white. The sudden glow did not blind anyone. It simply made them visible and made the space between them feel bigger and more open, like a stage. She watched shoulders drop as the surprise passed. They waited, expecting someone to come out. No one did. The light hummed softly, a reminder that their shadows were not their own anymore. She clicked a second button. A speaker near the tool shed chirped. Her recorded voice, calm and clear, played exactly 6 words. You are on camera. Please leave. The message was short by design. It did not threaten. It did not shout. It stated a fact and a choice. She watched the group shift again. One of them turned his head to search for the source of the sound. She pressed the button again, and the message repeated from a different small speaker near the orchard. The sound bounced gently across the yard like a breeze carrying a thought. For a moment, the group pulled back toward the fence. She could feel them thinking. She had seen this posture before in faraway places. The shoulders that wanted to look, bold, and the feet that wanted to go home. She did not move. She let the light keep humming. She let the night do its work. Then, a new shape moved from the right side near the tractor lane. He crouched low, slipping along the fence as if he could outweight the light. He went toward the barn, the most obvious target, the heart of the farm. She pressed her lips together, then reached for another small switch near her hand. The pump in the irrigation line clicked on. Along the lane, a row of low sprinklers woke with a hiss and sent steady arcs of water across the ground. The spray was not strong, not harsh. It simply changed the land, dry dirt turning to soft mud, quiet footsteps turning to heavy, slow steps that could not be hidden. The figures stepped back and talked in low voices. She could not hear the words, but she understood the idea. They were being watched, they were being recorded, and the ground was not on their side. She stayed where she was, slow and quiet, letting the sprinklers run for a minute before switching them off. The soil would hold the footprints like careful handwriting in wet clay. She slid her phone from her pocket and typed a short update to the sheriff's number. multiple trespassers on property. Lights on. Irrigation used to slow movement. Cameras recording. She included a pin drop from her map. She did not need to write more. She had already sent clips from her small cameras to a cloud folder that would remain even if someone tried to damage them. She believed in simple tools and simple steps that together became strong. The group shifted again. Two moved toward the orchard, where the trees stood in even rows and the grass was clipped neat. She had hung reflective tags. On a few branches earlier, a harmless shine that catches the eye in the dark. The tags hung at different heights, and as the two walked, the reflections blinked like watchful eyes between leaves. They slowed, uncertain, then passed around the end of the road to the far side of the barn. She descended the ladder and crossed to the back window of the house, staying under the eaves where the shadow stayed soft. She lifted the latch on a wooden panel she had built months ago. It swung open just enough to see the yard while keeping the inside dark. From there, she could reach another set of controls: the main yard light, the porch light, and the small horn near the rear gate. She placed her fingers over the switches and then stopped. She counted her breaths. She waited for the sound of a foot scuff on wet ground. There it was, soft and close. She turned on the porch light. It shone down in a wide cone and drew a clear shape of the porch floor. She stepped out and stood in the light's edge so that her own shape was simple. A person at home, standing, tall, calm, and unafraid. She spoke in a steady voice, each word slow and even so it would carry without strain. "This is private property," she said. "The sheriff has been notified. Cameras are recording. Please leave now." Her words spread out across the yard like calm water. The figures near the barn froze. She did not raise her voice. She did not step forward. She did not mention anything more. Silence followed, long enough for anyone listening to feel how still the fields could be when no one tried to disturb them. Then she stepped back into the shadow and turned the porch light off again. From the far fence, the small horn gave a single short beep, her timer reminding her to shift their attention. She triggered the barn chimes. The thin bells in the rafters rang gently, as if someone had walked inside, though the doors were still, shut and braced. The sound was soft, but it said, "There are more places watching than you think." She made another choice then. She moved to the side yard and turned on a set of tall lights that pointed toward the road, away from the house. The beams threw a long ribbon of brightness on the gravel, a clear exit, a path back to their car. She had learned long ago that people under stress often needed a simple way to decide. Offer a safe path, and many will take it. She did not want anyone to stumble into fear and do something. The air turned colder as midnight passed, and the sky felt wider, like the land was holding its breath. She kept her watch with the same calm focus she had used many times in her life, but now it was for home, not for a mission far away. The first wave had come and tested her. They had tasted the light, the water, the careful order of a farm that refused to panic. She knew how such nights worked. Pride rarely left after the first refusal. Pride circled back. Sometime after one, a low sound drifted across the hedgerow, the steady rumble of an engine that wasn't trying to be silent. Then another. She stood up from the window, rolled her shoulders once, and moved through the dark. House, like a soft breeze. Her hands checked the things she had set earlier, the panel for the lights, the small speaker controls, the switches for the irrigation lines near the driveway. She looked at the list on her phone and breathed. Each step was simple on its own. Together they formed a map in her mind. She paused by the old wooden trunk and opened it only an inch. The familiar scent of oiled metal and canvas rose up. She didn't need the whole kit. Not tonight. She lifted out her scope, the small, clear glass she trusted. She clipped it to a simple, stable rest near the back window that looked over the long gravel lane. She checked the wind with a pinch of dust at the sill. It fell straight down. Good. No need to account for drift if she needed to make a precise, safe sound in the distance. Headlights rolled slowly along the county road and then turned toward her lane. The front gate chain clinked. It didn't fall, because it was designed to give but not break. A decoy chain that shifted a hidden latch. The gate swung inward as if it had been forced. In truth, it had opened the only way she had planned for it to ever open under pressure, toward a path she controlled. 2 pickup trucks eased through. Their beams washed the yard in white and then cut as the drivers tried to hide the light. The night felt thicker for a second. She let them settle halfway up the lane, just beyond the low maple where she had left what looked like rolled hose across the gravel. They drove over it without notice. Inside the hose were small, gentle barbs tucked into soft matting, designed to let air whisper out of tires instead of bursting them. The trucks kept rolling. She counted her breaths, 1, 2, 3, and then the first driver noticed the steering grow heavy. He turned the wheel. The rim bumped the gravel. She flipped a switch. The yard fell into deeper dark as she cut her porch and side lights. Then she pressed the control for the tall flood at the far end of the lane. It snapped on like a calm sunrise, but behind the trucks, not in front of them. The light drew their shadows long and clear across the gravel. They had wanted to hide in the dark. Now the light stood where they had been and made shapes honest. Doors opened. Figures stepped out, shoulders up, talking with hands. She listened to their energy more than their voices. Some were sure, some were not. She did not lean closer. She stayed behind the sill, still and small, and touched the speaker button on her phone. Her voice moved through the night from the small unit near the tractor shed, level and even. "This is private property. Cameras are recording. The sheriff is on the way. Leave the tools in your hands on the ground and step toward the light on the gravel." They froze as if a teacher had called the room to order. The words were not a threat. They were instructions anyone could follow. One man lifted his hands to show they were empty. Another lowered something to the ground, slow and stiff. A third looked toward the dark porch, trying to measure distance with his eyes. She did not step out. She did not raise her voice. She pressed the same message again, but this time it came from a second speaker near the orchard, then again from the barn eaves. The sound shifted locations as if the land itself had a calm mind and many mouths. The group turned their heads from sound to sound, trying to place it. That was enough. Confusion and light together made people slow down. The front truck rocked slightly. The driver had kept the engine on, hoping to turn the wheel and ease around the mud patch that had formed when she watered the lane earlier. The tire answered with a soft sigh she could almost hear from her window. He pressed the gas, and the truck moved a yard, then the rim touched stone. He shut it off. Silence returned and grew. She looked through the scope, not to aim at anyone, but to read small details. Belt buckles catching light, hands shifting, the way one person stood with feet wide like someone trying to look bigger than he felt. She slid the scope left and right, then lifted her gaze to the far post she had set last summer to practice patience. A metal plate hung there, small and round, the kind that rang bright when struck. It sat well away from every person, with a safe hill behind it, the kind of place a careful person chose when they wanted sound without risk. She eased one hand into the trunk and brought up the rifle she kept clean and lawful, with the barrel, pointed down and respect in every movement. She rested it on the window saddle she had built weeks ago and took one breath to feel the calm center of her chest. The night held still. She knew this quiet, not empty, but full of attention. She found the round plate in the glass and let the cross settle there, the way a bird settles on a branch it knows is strong. The trigger broke like a soft whisper. The distant plate sang, one clear, honest note that carried across the yard and through the trees. The sound wasn't sharp or frightening. It was musical and measured, proof that a careful hand could touch a small thing far away without fuss. Every figure on the lane turned toward the sound at once. She did not fire again. She set the rifle down and touched the speaker. "Please do not move toward the house," her voice said, steady as a metronome. "Walk toward the light. Stay where the gravel is bright. Keep your hands where they can be seen." They moved. Not all at once, and not with grace, but with the kind of motion that comes when a night stops being a guessing game and starts being a path with signs. She turned. On the second flood near the road, creating a soft corridor of light like a runway. It led away from the animals, away from the barn, away from the house, and toward the open space where anyone arriving would see them plainly. As two men stepped forward, one hung back and veered right toward the orchard rows. She let him take 5 steps, then pressed the irrigation control. Water arced up between the trees with a calm hiss. The row he wanted to use turned from quiet to wet. He stopped. He looked at his shoes. He looked at the bright gravel, then turned back to join the others. No need to argue with him. The land had spoken. Her phone buzzed softly. A text. "Deputies en route. 10 minutes out." From the sheriff's number that sent updates without extra words. She typed back, "Group detained in lit area, near lane. No injuries. Vehicles disabled by slow leak. Recording continues." She made each word useful and short. She set the phone down. From the hedgerow, a small drone rose with a gentle hum. She had placed it on a timer before midnight, not as a surprise, but as a floating camera. It climbed to a modest height and drifted over the lane, its light steady, its lens sending a clean picture to the cloud. It wasn't there to frighten anyone. It was there to be a witness in the sky. She stepped away from the window and moved. To the side room, then to the back door, then to the kitchen corner that watched the lit patch from a different angle. She didn't want anyone to find a pattern to her position. It wasn't just a habit. It protected everyone. It reduced the chance that anyone would act out of guesswork and fear. She spoke again, this time from the porch speaker, soft and clear. "Sit down on the gravel, please. Palms on your knees. Stay where the light is strongest. Deputies will arrive soon." They sat. There were mutters, a few frustrated words, but the tone had changed. The loudness that had tried to control the land earlier had gone quiet. The group's posture told the story. Heads lower, movements smaller, a kind of stillness that replaced racing thoughts with waiting thoughts. She kept the path lit and the house dark. She let the night breeze pass through the hedgerow and carry away the tight feeling that had pressed against the fence an hour before. One man looked toward the trucks, as if a plan might still live there, but the front tires had settled into the gravel with a patient sort of finality. The vehicles would not be leaving soon. She had designed the slow leak mats for that reason, to move everyone from a chase story into a conversation story. Metal can be loud, air can be gentle. Gentle often works better. She thought briefly of the farm's morning, the milk pails, the animals, the market table that would need restocking after tonight. She pictured the eggs, the hay bales, the neat rows of carrots. Sometimes it helped to hold something ordinary in mind while moving through a tense hour. It reminded her what the hour was for. Far down the county road, a glow lifted and fell, the rhythm of a vehicle with purpose. Then another. The sound came first as a low brush of air, then a hum, then a presence. She did not step outside. She did not raise a hand. She left the lit patch and the sitting men as they were, and turned on a slim light by the mailbox to mark the turn. Then she went back to the panel, breathed, and waited for the red and blue to reach the lane. When the deputies' vehicles rolled into view, she dimmed all the lights except the ones that mattered. The corridor along the gravel and the small square where the group sat with palms on their knees. The scene became simple and clear, nothing to hide, nothing to Morning came softly, as if the land wanted to place a warm hand on her shoulder and say, "It's over." The sky turned from gray to gold, and the fields glowed like they were waking up from a long dream. She stood on the porch with a mug in her hands, not because she needed the drink, but because the warmth reminded her that simple things still mattered. The night had been long. It had asked for calm choices, careful steps, and steady breath. Now the sun lifted everything 1 inch higher, and even the fences seemed to stand straighter. The deputies had finished their work before dawn. They had thanked her again for the messages, the clear lighting, the recordings, and the way she kept things safe. One deputy, younger than the rest, had said shyly, "Ma'am, I've never seen anything that organized and that peaceful at the same time." She had nodded and replied, "It's a farm. Organization is how food happens." He had smiled at that, and the smile had felt like daylight arriving early. She watched the dust settle along the lane where the vehicles had been. The slow-leak mats lay quiet, like flat, sleepy snakes on the gravel. She rolled them up, carried them to the shed, and stored them out of sight. She opened the barn doors and greeted the animals one by one. The goats walked toward her with soft sounds, as if asking for a report. The cows were calm and ready for the day. She sniffed the air and smelled hay, wood, and a hint of damp earth from the watered orchard rows. Everything ordinary felt like a promise kept. After feeding and milking, she sat by her kitchen table and plugged in a small hard drive. The video files from the cameras and the drone lined up on the screen with timestamps, neat as buttons in a row. She created a folder, added labels, and sent a link to the sheriff. She also wrote 2 short notes. The first said, "All files included. Angles, barn eaves, porch, orchard, lane drone." The second said simply, "Thank you for your calm response." Then she closed the laptop, put the kettle on for tea, and let the house be quiet for a moment. By mid-morning, a neighbor truck turned into her lane. It was Mrs. Alvarez from 2 farms over, a kind woman with a strong back and a garden that could feed an army. She stepped out holding a covered dish and a basket of apples. "For your day," she said. Her eyes looked glossy, the way eyes do after a night with too little sleep and too many thoughts. "We heard," she added softly. "We heard you kept everyone safe." "I kept the lights on," the woman said. "That's all?" Mrs. Alvarez shook her head gently. "You kept your mind on. That's what matters." She set the dish and the apples on the porch table. "Some folks are planning a meeting tonight at the community center, not to cause worry, to learn." She paused. "It would help if you came." The woman nodded once. "If it helps the farms, I will come." Word travels fast in a small place. By noon, 3 more neighbors visited. One brought fence staples and asked if anything needed fixing. Another brought coffee and promised to lend extra motion lights. A third brought nothing but a kind hug and a long look that said, "I'm grateful." She accepted each gift with the same calm grace she used for her chores. She didn't talk about the night unless asked, and when she did, she kept her sentences short and plain. "I sent a text. I turned on the lights. I kept a clear path." The deputies did the rest. In the early afternoon, the sheriff stopped by. He wore the look of a person who had run a quiet race and was finally catching his breath. They sat at the kitchen table. He had a clipboard, she had a notebook. Together they filled in boxes and lines, times, positions, steps taken, what was said, how it ended. When they finished, he looked up and studied her face with respect. "Do you want your name kept private?" he asked. "I want truth kept simple," she said. "No drama, no stories that grow on their own." He nodded. "There may be some attention," he said carefully. "This was unusual and well handled, and some parts of your past may come up." She looked out toward the porch where sunlight lay in bright squares on the wood. "I served," she said softly. "I did my best. I came home. I became a farmer." The sheriff cleared his throat once, as if choosing the right words from a crowded shelf. "Your record is very strong," he said. "People may call it something larger than served." "They can call it what they like," she answered. "On this farm, I am a person who grows food. That is enough." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "For what it's worth," he said, "thank you for last night and for what came before in your life." She met his eyes, and her small nod carried years and miles without needing any more words. Before dusk, she walked the property with a pencil and a roll of tape. She marked 2 new spots for small lights and 1 low place along the fence, where rain had thinned the dirt. She made notes about the orchard rows that could use a second valve and a better drain. She wasn't hard on herself about what had gone wrong because nothing had collapsed. She simply looked for what could be made stronger. That was her way, not to argue with the past, but to prepare the ground for a better next time. At the community center that evening, the room filled with farmers, families, and a few teenagers who had learned more than they wanted to from the rumors. Folding chairs lined up in simple rows. A pot of coffee steamed near the back. Someone had set a plate of cookies that looked like little moons. The woman sat in the second row, not in the front, not in the back, the steady place where she liked to be. The sheriff spoke first. He explained what had happened without adding weight. He praised the early text, the lighting, and the clear path that turned a bad situation into a manageable one. Then he surprised the room by turning to the woman. "If you're willing," he said, "could you share how you planned your home, just the simple parts?" She stood, and the room grew quiet in the way people go quiet for something they want to remember. She spoke in small steps, each one practical. "I keep lights that I can turn on one at a time. I place a camera so it sees a path, not just a door. I think about exits, not just fences. I send a message early, not late. I use water and light to guide, not to punish. I keep my voice calm and I repeat clear words." She paused, then added one more. "I try to design choices that lead away from harm." Pens scratched on paper. Heads nodded. Someone asked about drones. Someone asked about text groups. A teacher asked how to speak calmly when afraid. The woman showed with her breath. In, hold, out. Short words, one idea at a time. A young man raised his hand and asked if they should all buy tools they didn't understand. "No," she said. "Tools you do not know are not help. Start with what you can use with care." When the questions ended, a small boy from the front row lifted his hand shyly. "Are you really a hero?" he asked. The room smiled, then held still for the answer. "I am a farmer," she said, kind and true. "I take care of living things. Sometimes taking care means planning, that's all." After the meeting, people gathered around a table to make a list, shared contact numbers, a simple code for porch lights to signal, "Call me," times to check in with elders who lived alone, and a plan to share extra lights and cameras where needed. The woman listened, offered a few notes, and watched the list grow. The list comforted her. It meant the land was learning to stand together. In the days that followed, small changes added up. A neighbor helped install a solar light near her far gate. Another neighbor taught a teen how to wire a bell without making it ring too loud. A retired carpenter offered to reinforce old shed doors around the valley. The sheriff arranged a short workshop on safety that focused on calm choices. Nothing about the changes felt heavy. They felt like adding new rows to a garden. A week later, a plain envelope arrived in her mailbox. Inside was a short letter from the sheriff's office. Most of the people from that night had been sent into a program that required service and guidance instead of only punishment. One of them had written a note. It was 4 lines long and careful. It said he had made a wrong choice and that he was learning to make better ones. He would be fixing fences for 3 months across the valley, including at her place, if she agreed. She read the letter at her table, then looked out at the late sun resting on her pasture. She wrote a reply. I agree. He will learn to build where he once tried to take. She added a small list of tasks that taught patience, post setting, gate hanging, and painting trim, work that required steady hands and careful eyes. On the first day the young man came, he stood at the edge of her yard with the supervisor from the program. He looked down, then up, then down again. She walked over and held out a pair of work gloves. This land needs builders, she said. Can you be that today? He nodded, a little surprised to be trusted, and they set posts, together in a rhythm that felt almost like music. Lift, place, level, pack, step back, nod. The wind moved through the hedgerow. A bird called. The work made its own simple peace. Now and then, someone asked her more direct questions about her past. A reporter called once, but she did not invite a camera. She answered with the same steady line. I served. I came home. I farm. A few closest neighbors learned more, how her calm came from long practice, how her skill with distance did not make her proud, only careful. They respected the quiet in her answers and returned it to her by changing the subject to seedlings, rain, and recipes. That respect felt like shade on a hot day. She took one more step for herself. She opened the wooden trunk where her old gear rested and set aside what she no longer needed. She kept a few